Today I'm going to do something different. Instead of trying to dance around spoilers, this time around I'm going to embrace them. And if you don't want to get spoiled, I urge you to stop the video right now and play Spec Ops The Line before watching the rest of it. I'm aware that this will drop the holy engagement numbers YouTube's looking for, but I think that the experience of playing this game for the first time without any heads up is more important, and I wouldn't feel comfortable to pretend I have not played this game before just so I can play up its implications. So now that I got this out of the way, let's take a look. I'll say this right from the start. Spec Ops The Line is a masterpiece that came out of nowhere, and there's no way to know this before playing unless people like me tell you. There are many games that attempt to create a well-crafted story with good characters, meaningful experiences alongside well-designed gameplay and level design and art direction in order to wow the players. But to my experience, I have seen none that was so able to dedicate all of the game's aspects to the story in the same way Jaeger managed to pull off. It's frankly incredible, and one of the reasons why there's no way to discuss this game in any way that is spoiler-free. But let's start from the beginning. The setting is a near-future Dubai that's been hit with devastating sandstorms. The character you play as, Captain John Walker, goes there in order to find what happened with the 33rd Battalion led by Lieutenant Colonel John Conrad and their failed evacuation mission. The mission turns sour very fast when you find yourself in the middle of a full-out war between the local population and the soldiers who seem to resort to anything in order to kill each other. And the deeper into the city Walker and his men go, the more questions arise as you discover that the 33rd actually went rogue and they're attacking CIA agents who came on a similar mission as you. And here lies the first layer of deception. You wouldn't be blamed if you played this for the first time and believed that there is nothing more than a generic third-person cover shooter with even more generic waves of Arabic insurgents facing you. You can only carry 2 weapons at a time. Walker is your square-jawed hunk of a man in the most G.I. Joe style imaginable. It uses the "we force you to walk slowly because the game wants you to show you something" trope that many modern military shooters like to do. Doesn't help that everything around you is mostly brown and yellow, just like many of the shooters in the mid-2000s in which you are playing as an American soldier in Iraq or Afghanistan. Hell, even the game's cover and its name only enforce the idea that everything about this is as generic as it can get, and thus the trap is set, and the game is more than happy to slowly flip the script on you. This starts with facing the bitter truth. The 33rd have been torturing and executing their own men who defied orders while staging a full-fledged war against the local population and the CIA. Evidence of this becomes more and more present from piles of bodies, unsettling graffitis, and rows after rows of men hanged from the street lamps. The depths of the horrific sights keep increasing, but the game doesn't let go and clatters you with the right hook the moment you see white phosphorus used in combat against the insurgents. While Walker and his men recover from the shock at what they've seen, the game slaps a collectible recording like this just to make it sting more.
I can't tell you how many times we rolled past kids fighting over garbage on our way to some bullshit op. So when the colonel saw a chance to actually do some good here, hell yeah, he took it.
What about the people back home? Calling you deserters? Traitors?
Man, fuck them. I'd love to go home, you know? I got a daughter I ain't seen since last Christmas, but my baby girl, she's safe in her bed right now. These people here, they ain't so lucky. What, I'm supposed to abandon them just 'cause I get homesick? Nah, we're better than that.
So you trust the colonel's decision?
110%. Colonel's a great man. Standing by his side makes me a traitor, then so be it.
This is a good moment to talk about the collectibles. They are 100% worth the hassle getting them. They do so much to flesh out the world around you and the characters that take part to the story that it's a genuine loss not to get them. As mentioned earlier, they can serve as a hammer that hits the narrative nail on its head. In many games they're an afterthought, a neat source of trivia and nothing vital to the experience of the story. In Spec Ops they serve as a vital component, which explains why they've been made so easy to collect most of the time. What follows is the most important aspect of the entire story so far. Faced with a large contingent of the 33rd troops, Walker, who is now more than convinced of their barbarity than ever, decides that the only course of action is to bombard them with the same white phosphorus they've used before, and the game doesn't shy away from showing you the full consequences of this crime. But just like before, the game isn't relenting on twisting the knife deep and revealing that the men you killed were protecting civilians who were also killed by your actions. Now the black and white picture that's been composed about them earlier is being blown out of the water, and Walker is hit with the reality of murdering dozens of innocent people in a way fit for a war criminal. Lugo and Adams, the two men under his command, are now more and more at each other's throats. They fight with each other, but they also start to openly question Walker's decisions. While from a narrative perspective this is entirely natural, the implication of this interaction has an additional layer within the gameplay. On top of the cover shooter element, the game also includes a simplistic squad management mechanic, which I'm tempted to say that it's similar to the original Brothers in Arms, if not for the fact that I really meant to say simplistic. You can command your men to attack an enemy either by focusing fire or by sniping him depending from the distance he's at. You can order a flashbang at scripted moments, and you can help bring back one of your companions from the brink of death. Nothing else. But what's relevant for my point is that the way your men answer to your orders change throughout the story. At first they answer them professionally.
Lugo, take him out.
Yes, sir!
But then their tone changes to scared, angry, and then to an increasing degree of reluctance and lack of respect for Walker's authority.
Shotgunner! Put him down!
Okay! Engaging target!
I need him moving again!
Hang tight, man! I'm coming!
Hostile behind that counter! Fucking kill him!
Okay! He's dead!
Yet another seemingly minor gameplay element that is used to serve the overarching storyline. From this point forward, Walker gets on a direct line of conversation with Conrad, who's obviously the reason for all the atrocities committed in the city. In order to defeat him, Walker and his men link up with one of the last CIA agents still alive and get sent in a suicide mission to capture the water tanks that hold the last remaining hope for the survival of the insurgents or anyone else in the city. But in reality, the CIA's real mission has been to cover up the entire situation in order to avoid the disastrous geopolitical impact news about what happened in Dubai would have for the United States. They were never intending on saving the people or recovering the men of the 33rd. The fights that take place from this point forward aren't against a rogue battalion, but they're against soldiers who want to take revenge against Walker more than anything else after what he's done, and it shows in their waves of ever increasing number. It all culminates with Walker massacring an entire tower of American troops while screaming bloodlust at the top of his lungs. As a matter of fact, the gunplay is good, way beyond what third-person cover shooters usually provide. The 2-gun limit I mentioned before isn't a problem because all guns can help you clear through the opposition, but one thing that's worth mentioning is the way ammo management is handled, because you are very often put in the situation where you run out of ammo. Switching weapons is often an option, but the game offers a more desperate solution to your problems. You see, not all the enemies that you draw up are dead. Some of them are left on the ground groaning in pain, which leaves you the opportunity to execute them for a much needed ammo replenishment, just like the recent Doom game does. But here you've got the additional implication of such an action, since when he does it, Walker commits yet another crime. And it's not just that he shoots them dead, he cracks their skulls with the butt of his guns, crunches their necks with his boots, or strangles them like a maniac, almost as if he expresses the player's despair for more ammunition in the fight. The violence of these executions escalates in line with the events that take place during the story. Yet again, a simple gameplay mechanic that is being used to serve the narrative. From here on out, Walker's struggle becomes more desperate as he gets separated from his men and rushes to save them while fighting a seemingly endless wave of soldiers. But by the time he reaches Lugo, he's already been lynched by the desperate locals. Well beyond their breaking point, Walker and Adams cut through the remaining members of the 33rd in order to reach Conrad. And just like Lugo and Adams start changing their demeanor while performing their actions during gameplay, so does Walker's. The tone of his orders and shouts start from sounding concise and professional,
Reloading! Hostile down! He's done!
Got one!
Reloading!
Changing position!
to slowly descending into a cacophony of rage and bloodlust.
I got him. He's down.
Fucking stay down!
Rush!
Kill! Burn! Got another one!
He's exploded!
This is slowing me down.
Burn like the
Heavy
president!
is down! Repeat! Heavy trooper is fucking down!
By the tail end of the story, Walker enjoys the bloodshed he commits, and his decaying humanity is perfectly captured in part by this small detail. Before I talk about the end of the story, there's something else that needs mentioning. You remember all those little tips that you keep seeing on loading screens but choose to ignore because they contain useless information? Well, you should be used to by now, but they also include storyline relevant quotes in Spec Ops: The Line, and they become darker the further down the campaign you progress. It's frankly incredible as to how many things the developers used in order to hammer down the story and the atmosphere they've been going for. But now we reach the most heartbreaking part of the entire story. Walker finally reaches Conrad's apartment for what seems to be the final confrontation, but which turns out to be the moment of revelation for both Walker and you as a player. Conrad in fact killed himself God knows how long before, and all his communications with Walker were just the product of a mind broken with guilt. All the taunts that Conrad was levying via the radio were in fact Walker's conscience trying to deal with the horrible acts he has committed. All four possible conclusions to the story that are available from this point forward make sense in their own way. Once you realize the extent of Walker's delusions, many of the things that previously seemed straightforward now make a lot of sense. Lugo and Adams weren't just your subordinates, they were in fact reflections of the two things that Walker lost during his degradation. Lugo was his moral compass, always being the first to point out things Walker was doing was wrong. Adams, on the other hand, was a sense of duty and loyalty to the job, always willing to follow his superior's instructions until he too lost his humanity before ceasing to live with what he did. Without them, Walker is no longer a soldier, neither a human being. The voice acting is absolutely stellar and carries the writing from being good to being incredible all throughout the game. It's not just the well-established names like Bruce Boxleitner, Nolan North or Jake Busey that are doing a good job, but the entire cast put a lot of effort into their performances. This to me shows that the project had a good director as well, something which is kinda odd to say about when a video game is the subject. The level design, while plain and straightforward on the surface, is in fact a metaphor for their descent into madness by constantly forcing the player to drop down lower and lower into each level. Almost every time Walker and his men are faced with a ramp going upwards into the light, they are immediately forced to go down, suggesting that all their efforts of avoiding madness are fruitless. The symbolism and references peppered throughout the game are aplenty and difficult to mention all in one video without turning it into an entire novel, but the most obvious ones for me to mention are the upside down US flag at the start of the game, the graffitis portraying Lady Liberty like a demon wrapped in the flag's colors, and the window reflection foreshadowing Lugo's death. Some are more obvious than the others, and my advice to anyone playing is to really pay attention to your surroundings, because even while browsing the footage I was discovering things that completely blew past me while I was recording. And then there's the stuff you wouldn't even guess, like the changing main menu backgrounds depending on the level you're currently playing. The game's writing is heavily inspired by Heart of Darkness and Apocalypse Now, so the fact that a lot of the music you get to hear is reminiscent of the Vietnam War era is far from being a coincidence. Neither is the game's very poignant and scathing anti-war discourse, it subtly sneaks in whenever it gets the chance. The harshness of this and the way it explores the cruel things men are capable of doing means that the end of the story leaves a fairly hollow and depressing feeling feeling. Frankly, some of these things are difficult to write about, and this is the exact same feeling Apocalypse Now left in me so many years ago when I first saw it. For me personally, it hits from the perspective of someone who grew up in the 1990s post-communist Eastern Europe, exposed to American media from the 80s and 70s, which tended to have a more favorable outlook on what America is for the most part. It's hard to see something that you grew up to admire be teared down on just grounds, but I wouldn't rush to say that it proves that America is bad like there's a tendency with this kind of stuff. It's in fact the contrary. The flaws of the characters and their despicable actions only reinforce that the values associated with the country, real or propaganda be damned, are something worthy to preserve, even if those tarnishing those values are sometimes your own kind. Honestly, I'm not sure if going this way is wise, since this is a subject that would require maybe hours of dissection, so I'll leave it at that for the moment. I mentioned at the start of my analysis that I believe Spec Ops: The Line to be a masterpiece. I stand by that assessment, but it should be noted that it's a masterpiece of its time. The gameplay and the setting's role in the deception only plays out in the context of an entire decade filled to the brim with boring cover shooters and mundane Middle Eastern shooter galleries playing as Marine Square Johnson, who brings democracy and freedom over the sandy dunes. As much as I'd like to say that a criticism of this is timeless, the reality is that I doubt that a young player would fall into this trap, which is a shame because the anti-war and the cruelty of man themes are 100% timeless, but they only become obvious later on in the story, which may be too late for those getting bored with the gameplay and unaware of what's in store for them. You know, I recommended those that never played this before to do it before they watched this video, but now I can make a recommendation to those that did experience it sometime in the past. Play it again. You'll feel awful after ending the story, but it's the kind of awful that comes with reflection after what you have experienced. I'm certainly glad I did, because 9 years ago I missed a lot of things that became very clear and obvious in the present. Who said that getting old doesn't have its perks? Thanks for listening to my thoughts on the experience that is Spec Ops. Like this video and subscribe to not miss my next video, which will take a bit of time to finish since it'll be fresh territory for me and I don't want to half-ass it. Until next time, cheers.
Go on. What do you think? You did this. No, you did. Your orders killed 47 innocent people. Someone has to pay for your crimes, Walker. Who's it gonna be?